Miles Hunt, welcome into the weeds. The lead Senate candidate for the Legalise Cannabis Party Australia in New South Wales. Thanks for coming onto the show, brother.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm very excited to be here with you.
You're down in the Big Smoke. You live up in Port Macquarie?
Yeah, near there. A small little coastal town called Bonny Hills.
Bonny Hills. What a beautiful spot.
Plenty of beaches there and nature.
And who do you live up there with? Your partner and kids?
Yeah, I got a couple of young kids, 5 and 8, who are just at school, and, you know, my partner. He's from Brazil.
From Brazil?
Yep.
Beautiful. She'd be loving the beaches and the lifestyle up there.
Definitely.
Mid-north coast of New South Wales, one of the most beautiful and undiscovered parts of Australia and the world, isn't it? It's magic.
Don't tell anyone. No, but it's seriously, I think it's a totally incredible coastline area, which, you know, is hardly developed at all. You'll be the next Byron, mate.
The next Byron, let's hope not, because Byron's, you know, suffering under its own popularity.
Yeah.
It's neck deep in influencers and boutique hotels and movie stars. So Bonny Hills sounds fantastic, mate. Look, Miles, you've been a courageous advocate for drug law reform for a long time. And I really want to get into that, how you came to be like the tip of the spear for drug law reform, cannabis law reform in New South Wales and Australia. But before we do that, I mean, we're heading towards a federal election. You're the lead Senate candidate for the Legalise Cannabis Party. You're a chance of getting elected. You may well end up in the balance of power in the Senate, fingers crossed. So
a huge responsibility.
Huge responsibility, no pressure. So let's find out a little bit about you. Where did you grow up? Where are you from?
Well, I grew up in the North Shore of Sydney, a place called Roseville, and then you know, went to school there and all that sort of thing. Very North Shore life, middle class sort of
the
suburban,
insular peninsula,
that sort of area. Yeah, that's it. And then spent all my life in Sydney, really. So I only moved out a couple of years ago, 3 years ago during COVID, and have always been Sydney. It's always been my life, and yeah, I mean, I went to law school at Macquarie, studied law and philosophy, did a lot of travel through Asia and South America, spent, you know, a year overseas here and there, and really enjoyed that. That was really good. And then I worked as a lawyer, got into law. That was sort of unexpected. I finished.
Why law though? What you know? Why were you interested in law? Why were you interested in justice? These issues? Was it in the family, or was it just something that you took upon yourself?
No, they were all vets in my family and nurses and things, so very medical. But my dad loves words, so I suppose that's part of it. But I was originally I wanted to be a filmmaker, like Tarantino and all that sort of stuff. And then I realised that I was pretty hopeless at media and communications and not particularly skilled in editing or anything like that. And then my girlfriend at the time's dad was a lawyer, and everyone had always told me I was a good arguer and I should be a lawyer. So I thought, I transferred to Macquarie, got in, and I loved it. Met my best mate there, met some really good people. Loved the university lifestyle, meeting people, expressing, learning creativity and philosophy, which I had a sheltered private school. I didn't really experience it all. So it really opened my eyes. I really didn't like school that much and was bullied and so that sort of thing. But uni was great. And law was really good. But I didn't really necessarily want to be a lawyer. And then I just stumbled into it. My mate got me a job and worked as a personal injury lawyer. But there was always something missing, I want to do something more with that. I liked helping people who suffered an injustice, who were injured, helping them get compensation against insurance companies. That fitted with my morality, but, supporting the little person against a big company and people who needed help and supporting justice. And I sort of dabbled into a bit of helping with people who were caught criminal for criminal sanctions for drug use, and that always, as a drug user myself, someone who started experimenting with cannabis and everything at uni, it always sort of caused a consternation. Is like, why are we criminalising people for drug use? It's unjust and absurd. And I always thought that, and that's when I sort of got into it.
So you're at uni, you're studying philosophy. Talk about that. Who was opening your mind up? What were the philosophers you were into?
I don't want to live in a socialist dictatorship, but I do believe in the merits of helping people in society, and it needs to be mixed with libertarian. I appreciate freedom and libertarianism as well, but that bit of Kant, Immanuel Kant, and theories like the brain in the vat theory, or things like we're all living in. It's a common theory now that we're all living in a simulation, multiverses. I love that sort of stuff where you're sort of questioning reality. And we could be in a dream. Who knows? We don't understand consciousness. There's so much of this universe we don't understand. I also like moral philosophers like Plato and things about courage and justice and truth and honesty and those sort of key elements to being a good human. And I try to strive towards that, although we all fail. Life is the continued striving to be better, I think, but that's part of it.
So you developed a pretty strong value set there. You headed out in the world. You said you travelled South America.
Yeah.
How much trouble did you get into in South America?
Mate, I travelled all the way across for about 9 months with my mate. Ended up in Peru, in Cuzco, Machu Picchu, Bolivia. Those, some incredible places. I love South American culture. They've got a good party vibe. They like, cannabis is good there. It's a part of their culture as well, and having fun and partying. And I love the indigenous cultures of South America. I met a Peruvian girl and went back and lived in Lima for a summer holiday. And then I ended up being with a Brazilian. So I feel like I've got a bit of the old Latino in me. Well, I connect to Latinos.
There you go. Got to say you're the most un-Latino looking fellow I've ever met. But what's that weed in Colombia called, mate? Santa Marta Gold. Yeah, there's some heads that have come over to Australia that want to import Colombian weed into Australia. I think they already are. And because Colombia was the point source for all the best weed into California in the 60s and 70s,
yeah, right.
They've got these amazing strains of high altitude, low latitude, so basically grown on the mountains at the equator, of these full spectrum weeds, and Santa Marta Gold apparently is the bomb. So you probably run into some of that over there. I'm hoping to get over to Medellin and check some out and get away without having my throat cut or my life taken and my iPhone stolen. But that's
I've been to Medellin. It's pretty good. I think
not as nasty as people say.
I think there's in any place in South America there's danger and risk. Certainly there's gun violence in Brazil and other places. But if you've got your wits about you and you trust your instinct, most people in this world are pretty good. I was in Mexico last year with my family. My daughter ran off in a small town. She was 4, ran through the town. We lost her. She was on her own, and we were very paranoid, scared at this moment because she chased after this family that we'd been travelling, couldn't find them, and then went through the town. They said they saw this kid flying past and all this stuff, and we went up, and my partner was crying, and we got to the end of the town, and she wasn't there, and then a taxi came back and brought her back, and she came out of the taxi. And
wow, that would have been terrifying.
And I realised at that point that most people in this world are good. 99% of people are good. You just have to be unlucky to meet the bad person at the wrong time. So,
and that can happen wherever you are in the world.
Exactly.
I keep telling my partner that, despite reports that I think there's 300 Colombian politicians killed each year, that, it'll be perfectly safe. She's not convinced at all. So you've travelled the world, you've seen a bit, you've developed this value system, you're back in Australia, you're working as a lawyer, and you get involved in the drug law reform activism.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, I was, because of my interest in drug law reform from a legal justice point of view, and I started researching about drug law reform entities in Australia, and there was this fellow in Melbourne, Greg Chipp, who's son of Don Chipp from the Democrats, who had started a party called the Drug Law Reform Party.
Yes.
So I gave him a call, flew down to Melbourne, met him, and he was looking for candidates across the country.
What year was this?
2013.
Yeah, right.
The Abbott election.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was, I think, or maybe Abbott had just dropped out around then, but he had a number 2 candidate in New South Wales called Tony Trimmingham, who's involved in drug support for families. And he was looking for a number 1, and I just got the gig, which was pretty funny and surprising and unexpected. And I learned about campaigning, got posters up, handed out flyers, did this whole 2013 election, and we only got 3,000 votes or something. I think that was the year Ricky Muir got elected to the Senate. So I mean, it was possible we could get a minor party elected, but it was quite small at that time. And you had these, and then through that I met these drug law reform characters like Alex Wodak, who've been instrumental in like needle syringe programs in the 90s, sort of the beginning of the injecting centre and all that sort of stuff under Bob Carr and that period of drug harm reduction and law reform. And it was a really profound experience meeting all these people who'd done so much for harm reduction and for drug users. And through that I met Will Tregonning because he turned up to a campaign meeting, and he and I decided after the election to set up a charitable organisation called Unharm, which was...
Well, before we get to Unharm, how did the drug law reform party go at the election? Only 3,000 votes.
Yeah, 2,770.
2,770, but they ran across the country?
Yeah.
So this is after the hemp party, the Help End Marijuana Prohibition party had sort of come and gone, and before that the Australian Marijuana Party, and then before the Legalise Cannabis Party.
Yeah.
So there's always sort of been in Australian politics someone flying the flag in elections for drug law reform. What happened to the drug law reform party?
Well, went across the country, and I think it was useful. It was a useful experience to getting the word out, as you say, being part of that connection. And I think all people who have worked in drug law reform and harm reduction have a role to play and have contributed to the process, because it's a long, slow process, a long fight, civil rights fight, I think. But that party ceased after the election because, it didn't do that well, and Greg decided to set up his own charity which is called Drug Policy Australia, and runs out of Victoria and does a lot of great stuff. They sell nitazene and fentanyl testing kits, and they do a lot of programs where they do education around drug law reform. So he sort of moved into that space, and then I did the same with Will with Unharm.
Unharm. Yeah. And Unharm has been an incredibly effective advocacy group. Recently, we've had the announcement of drug checking, and Will and Harm Reduction Australia and others have been absolutely fundamental to getting that up. So a really effective charity there. But you also led the way in terms of, putting your own personal story out there. It was 2013, 2014, you wrote an opinion piece.
Yeah, well, yeah, I
remember the headline was pretty out there. It was like, I do drugs.
Yeah, that was on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald.
Front page, big photo of you.
Yeah, and it said the drug-taking lawyer.
The drug-taking lawyer. The only one.
Yeah, and that's it, the only one. Yeah. I can assure you, I know, I've seen others.
You're not Robinson Crusoe, mate. There's no doubt about that.
It came out with the drug survey, and the journalists wanted to speak to someone about their experience as a drug.
So it came out after what?
Around, I think it was March 2013. It was after the election. They wanted to release, the drug survey where it talks about the increased number of people using, which each year there's always an increase, and quite substantial numbers of drug users out there and all that sort of stuff. And they wanted to do it with a story with someone who was admitting their drug use.
Yep.
And so I volunteered myself, and I thought, it'll probably just be a story in the back of the paper. Then they came and did a photo, and then I did an article. I talked about my own personal drug use and my experiences in South America with, San Pedro cactus, peyote, that sort of thing, and cannabis and other recreational drugs I used over the years, and tried to be really honest about the whole thing. And then came the next day, I turned up to work, and there on the newspaper that they bring into work, my face was on the front page. I didn't know I was going to be on the front page. They said, "You're going to be famous tomorrow." I thought, "Oh yeah, maybe just because I'm in the paper." And there I was. And then my mum rang me. She's like, "Oh," she couldn't even speak. "Oh," my sister had to call me, and then my mum was distressed because they'd got the newspaper and I hadn't told them because I didn't know I was going to be on the front page. And then she's like, "Oh, he's ruined his life," and the shock. I imagine seeing it because she's a worrier, right? And then opens the front page, bang, there's her son looking up. "I've used drugs," and I didn't realise.
But that is an incredibly courageous thing to do at any time. You're a professional. You've got a family. You go out there and honestly say, I've used drugs recreationally in my life. They've been of benefit to me. I've managed them. How did you frame it? How did you you didn't just go out there and say, look, I've just...
Sorry.
I've just been just taking everything and anything, and like, how did you frame drugs and what they'd meant to you and how they'd, in actual fact, help you in terms of your personal development?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Like I realised that I needed to follow up the piece with an opinion piece. So I immediately wrote a long opinion piece about why I came out on the front page. And the main reason was that I thought drug use is a taboo and no one talks about it. People are using it across the society, but there's no open, honest discussion. And I thought, how can we have better drug laws until we have an open, honest discussion about drug use? How can we fix the mess unless people are allowed to openly discuss it? So that was the motivation. And then I went through about how I've used it, all these drugs, I've had experiences with drugs, and some experiences have been positive. I had a good time. I felt good. I connected with friends, say on MDMA, or I had psychedelics which made me connect with the universe and feel at one with consciousness. And I had negative experiences of, paranoia or feelings or just bad experience like you can have on any drug, alcohol, whatever, the drug being. There was more positive experiences, but there was also some negative experiences.
Did it ever tip in your life into addiction? Did you ever struggle with addiction with any of these substances, or was that part of the conversation?
No, I feel addiction. I mean, I had brief period of maybe a bit of tobacco addiction, not huge. I was more a social smoker occasionally. Cannabis at university, there was a period where I probably smoked quite regularly. It never got detrimental to my studies. I never felt I had addiction to anything, a significant addiction or anything like that. But I did feel like I'd seen the positives and negatives of drugs across the board, and I'd had friends who had addictions, and I'd seen the negative consequences of addiction and felt it at times as well. So what I was trying to say is, yes, drug use can be problematic, but generally, overwhelmingly, most drug use is positive, whether it's a beer at a party or a coffee to start you at work or a joint to help you relax
or a medicine that you take.
An opiate for pain, or, as I said, a psychedelic experience where you connect with nature like we did historically throughout human times and for spiritual and ceremonial purposes. So most experiences are positive. Occasionally you can have negative experiences. Let's try and spend all our time focusing on making drug use as positive, having most people who do use drugs, and make them aware of all the situation, all the possible results and consequences, give people the education and the tools, give people the setting to have a positive experience, and encourage that positive experience, and try to reduce negative experience, be it addiction or problematic use or negative use, or
and some drugs you just can't, like it's highly unlikely that you're ever going to be able to use them safely, like meth and things like that, ice.
Yeah, and you always got to be aware of that situation. And I feel like in some ways ice only exists because of criminalisation.
That's a really good point. Like so what you're saying there is that meth and ice are really it's freely available, incredibly cheap, and it's pretty much in our society because these other drugs, like cannabis especially, are prohibited. They're in the black market and they're expensive.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, you can have a similar version to methamphetamine, say dexamphetamine, which is a drug for ADHD and is like a speed pill in a way, which can be, for someone who's suffering ADD, it's a positive, useful drug. And it's the harm associated was minimal because it's quite weak. But if you strengthen a speed-like substance into methamphetamine, where it's highly powerful, highly addictive, strong, then you get far more negative consequences. And the reason you get that strengthening is because of prohibition, because a drug dealer who wants to make money makes more money by making a substance stronger, more addictive. You make more money and you get more comeback from users. And it's like the opposite of what happened with alcohol in America when it was prohibited. You don't get people making beer. You get people making 50% moonshine, and then there's more problems, more addiction, more death from liver disease, and so criminalisation overwhelmingly causes significantly more problems than the drugs themselves.
Because the drug producer, the drug seller, they don't really care about their the health of the user. They're in it for the profit, and there's no oversight. There's no regulation. It's all happening behind closed doors in the black market. Yeah, it's a really good point. So you think that in your life, drugs have had some beneficial impacts. They've expanded your consciousness, helped you relax, and you were prepared to get out there and say it. And on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald, which was pretty much unprecedented, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And like for a lawyer, for a professional, for a person like embedded in their community, it was an incredibly brave move.
Thanks, Jeff.
You said that your mum ran up in tears, crying into her cup of tea. What have you done with your life, Miles? So walk us through what happened in terms of work, relationships, all the rest.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. It was, I think it was one of the, in hindsight, it's one of the proudest things I've done in my life. So, but at the time it wasn't all easy, as you say. There were some negative consequences. I mean, first of all, the law firm I was working at, we had the most hits on the website that day, right? Because all the other lawyers were looking me up through the Law Society website to see where I worked. And then I went to all the barristers' conferences that week. They're all calling me the drug taking lawyer, and I felt I got that sort of buzz and the kick of fame. But then, and most lawyers are conscious of the injustice of drug laws. Like the bar associations come out with a drug law policy, and Law Society. Most lawyers are, even though some make their money through representing criminal clients.
New South Wales Council of Civil Liberties. Yeah, all of them are
they all support it.
They all support it
to decriminalise. So,
but they must have just been tapping you on the back. Go, son. Well done. Very courageous. Off you go, out of the trench into no man's land.
Yeah.
And so you did cop some. I mean, because you can still Google it. Miles Hunt. Yeah. Drug taking lawyer, bang, up pops that story.
Yeah, and my friend of mine I was working at his law firm, and there was pressure for him to sort of terminate my employment, but he was a good guy, and he forgave. He said, "Look, you didn't realise it was." I told him I didn't know it was going to be on the front page, and I stayed there. But if I'd been working at some of the big firms, that would have been probably the end of my employment. And you think about if I'd been terminated from my employment and couldn't get another job as a lawyer, it could have spiraled down to a really bad situation. So, I'm thankful that my friend stuck by me, and things happen for a week or two, and then people forget about it. And then he said that some people came up to him after. A lot of people came and said it was courageous, and people would come up to me and they were supportive overall. So I felt good about it, and the people were supporting me. But I also felt that, I was in a position of privilege, educated white male in a good job with his friend, in a situation where I wasn't fired, where I didn't suffer huge consequences as a result. But you can imagine it would be a lot harder for someone in a minority or a marginalised group to do the same thing. So I think... and I do realise there's that sliding doors moment where I could have gone bad. Everything could have spiraled in a negative way. My partner was all supportive, which was good, and I didn't have kids at the time. There was no negative consequences for them. My parents got over it, and overall, most people were supportive because most people have experienced drugs. Most people have used drugs themselves, be it legal drugs like tobacco, alcohol, caffeine, medicines, like opiates, or illegal drugs. And even if you haven't used cannabis or things that should be legal, but those sort of substances, which 48% of Australians have tried, or 47%, and then you would definitely know someone who's done it, or you've seen it. So I think it's a common experience, and humans have been using drugs since the dawn of time. It's part of who we are. So I think overall people can understand. Hang on, that's a human story. It's not just about me. So
and it was an honest story. You're attempting to reduce stigma.
Yeah. And
it certainly catapulted you into a leadership position in the drug law reform movement. You start Unharm. with Will Tregonning and others.
Yeah.
And you go to work. What sort of work did you do over the last decade?
Well, I mean, I was a director there for about 9 years, and we did a lot of work in harm reduction. And as you mentioned before, the loop around drug checking or pill testing, that's sort of been a long time coming, and working with groups that already existed and lobbying and promoting the use of drug checking, which is a really obviously smart service to give people at festivals or in the city the option to be able to go and test a drug to see if it's been laced with something like fentanyl, which can be deadly. You know, saving life should be the priority, not some sort of concept that we're by giving the go-ahead to pill testing, you're encouraging people to use drugs. No, every life is key, and if you can save one life, it's worth it. You know, so every festival, people who want to go and test their drugs should be able to do it, and if it can save lives, it's so good. It's sort of that's one part of it, and there was
I did hear that with the trials in Victoria, our colleague in Victoria, Rachel Payne, because they've got the drug checking trial at the festivals down there, said that 80% of the people that turned up, mostly young people, who turned up at the festival to have their drugs checked, the conversation they had with a health professional, 80% of them, it was the first conversation they'd had with a qualified health professional about the impacts of these potential drugs, the first conversation they'd had. So it created a discourse, and a significant number of those young people then said, well, hold on, what this was sold to me as it's not. You know, it's cut with all these other things. It's not what they said. It said, on the packet, and they discard their drugs. Yeah. And for some people, that's going to save their lives, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's just a rational, good policy, isn't it? And if you go and buy what you think MDMA is MDMA, and it turns out to be something you didn't know what it was, as you say, you can get rid of it, or they can start the dialogue, and then those people can say, listen, there's the MDMA you've got is quite strong. You should have less of it. It's a hot day. Make sure it's about creating education and giving people the tools to have the safe, ethical use and reduce risk, right?
Yeah, and so these are the risks. These are how you reduce them. So a mature, honest, rational conversation.
Yeah, so good. Like, I'm glad that's in New South Wales. It's happening here, and it's fantastic. And you've got to commend the government for doing that, because it's courageous. And
but you've got to commend Unharm and yourselves for leading the fight, Harm Reduction Australia and other groups, really pushing this for decades and decades. It's been the case, hasn't it?
Yeah, and there's people like David Caldecott and,
Gino Van Barker.
Exactly. There's a lot of people involved in that, in the loop. And I haven't done it much. Will at Unharm's really been the lead guy there, and Gideon, he did a lot of help there at Unharm. And I sort of was in the background, and he did most of the things there. But, I was involved in the process around sniffer dogs, and with David Shoebridge of the Greens, trying to sort of go against the sniffer dogs and mount a case that why we're using sniffer dogs at festivals. It's basically just allowing the police to search whoever they want, because a lot of the time, 70% of the time, it's false positives. The dogs are sniffing, giving an indication to someone who doesn't have anything on them, and the police are using that indication to search them. So you're just creating this process where you can get around reasonable suspicion and search whoever you want. So that was another one we did, and the Redfern Legal Centre ran with that. So I always feel that there's lots of entities involved.
And they've been running a big campaign. I know Sam Lee at Redfern Legal Centre running the big campaign against strip searching kids, which is just an abomination.
Yeah, and there's a legal case on it, and which, ideally you remove sniffer dogs, but at least if you're not going to do that, at least get the police to use them in a more responsible way, right? And reduce harm. There's much more harm, trauma associated with strip searching some 18-year-old at a festival, female at a festival, stripped her, make them squat, trying to find drugs, there's nothing on them. That's traumatizing. That's causing much more risk than finding a substance on the person, So, I mean, it's all about harm reduction and risk reduction, which was all about what Unharm was about. And I was also there when Lucy, the Haslam story about which was really crucial to the medicinal cannabis legalisation, which is another great step in the story of drug law reform, and is sort of opening the way for cannabis reform for adult use as well. But that's a great story because it's a human story. You've got someone who's battling terminal cancer who is nauseous and
Dan Haslam. It's an amazing story, isn't it?
Yeah, and his dad's a policeman, and he's using cannabis as the only thing he can use to give him relief. What person can't empathise with that story? And in history, you see that civil rights movements. Rosa Parks and the bus refusing to stand up. People need to connect to a story. You can't just give them statistics. There's this much people being arrested, or this much money you can make from cannabis, or this much expenditure from the police. You need those stories where people say, hang on, you got someone who's dying, who's so sick, and the only thing they can use is medicinal cannabis. And their dad's having to get it illegally, and he's a policeman. You know what I mean? The mum or whoever was procuring it, have to getting it on the black market, and those people are all risking criminalisation. That's a story we can all relate to, because we can relate to. You don't want to see someone going through that, and that changed the course of history here.
Everyone could see. They could just say, imagine if it was you.
Yeah.
You were put in that situation. I think most people can when it comes to drug law reform, because there aren't many families out there that don't, in their history, have some family member that gets caught in the gears of addiction, be it to alcohol or tobacco or a substance. And often the lament is, well, there's not enough assistance out there. There's not enough education. One, to stop people, getting into that situation, to look for the signs that they're in that situation, and then to help families get out of it. It's an incredibly under-resourced area, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of great people who do it, right? Tony Trimmingham, he does that with his family drug service. He had a son who died from a drug overdose, and then he's provided a service where it's support for families in those situations. And this is what all of harm reduction is about. It's about trying to reduce addiction and negative drug consequences and risks associated with criminalisation. And then and realising that criminalisation of drug users, pushes it underground, pushes the drug use under the ground. It makes people not feel safe to go forward when they're in a difficult situation, or when their friends had too much and needs treatment. They might feel scared to call an ambulance and save a life there. And as we talked about before, the fact that the drugs are made underground by a criminal network, there's no process in looking at the quality control and things like that. So I feel decriminalisation as a process is really important to go through, and it's not necessarily about every drug you decriminalise. It's about working out how you deal with each drug and how to minimise harm for each drug. And a low risk drug like cannabis, the obvious answer is some sort of regulation and legalisation, whether that's allowing people to grow some or share in groups and all that sort of stuff. That is something we're experiencing throughout the world, and I think it's important that we look at each drug differently. And some drugs, like opiates, need to be through a medical process, and you need a prescription. That's fine. And then others, like cannabis, we've got to find a better regulation, because the current model of just criminalisation and making it illegal is a failing and is wrong.
And there's basically social laboratories we can look at, isn't there? We're not the tip of the spear when it comes to these reforms. If you look around the world, there's some great models of how people have dealt with this vexed and complex and widespread issue. If you look at Portugal and what they've done there, and that's been had a profound impact, hasn't it? Where they've really looked at addiction, drug use through a health lens, taken it out of the criminal justice system to the point where they really had like a heroin epidemic in Portugal, and now it's essentially non-existent.
Yeah, isn't that an incredible story? That 20 years ago, or it's I think more than 20 now, the health minister and they set up a model to push people through.
Yeah, I think it was actually the Secretary General of the UN.
Yeah, he is now, right?
Yeah. Antonio Guterres. Yeah, and
it was a model of putting people, instead of putting people through the criminal justice system, you put them through a health system, and connect people with professionals and educate people on risks. And as you say, it's funny, humans often get things wrong. We think the deterrence of criminalisation reduces use. But then you see a model like Portugal where you decriminalise and you bring it into the fold, you can reduce the heroin use. You can reduce the risk and that epidemic. And you can see that with alcohol and tobacco. Tobacco policy now is regulated in a good way, and we've reduced use over 50 years hugely. So it's ironically bringing something into the fold and giving it some sort of acceptance in society and dealing with it in a different way to that criminal justice system gives you more tools to reduce use and reduce problematic use. It's the opposite to what we think, you know?
Yeah, that's right. If we look at alcohol, like we tax it, we regulate it. It's an incredibly regulated commodity and drug. Look, where you can use it, how you can use it, the strength of it, how you can advertise. You know, we've really dealt with. We've got some good examples from alcohol and tobacco we can rely on when it comes to cannabis, especially, don't we?
Yeah, and I think that's the key here. Look, as you said before about all the different models, you know, I'm reading this book from Transform about regulation of cannabis, and you don't need to start from scratch. We have these. We can look at the Amsterdam model around coffee shops, or you can look at the Uruguay model where the government sells it at a fixed price through pharmacies. And you can have, or the German model of having cannabis clubs where you all can grow a certain number of plants, but you can combine that together and share cannabis and share knowledge. And
that's really what's interesting about Germany, biggest economy, biggest country in Europe. They've moved essentially to like our party's policy of responsible adult use, grow a few plants, share it amongst friends, through clubs. They haven't gone to like the American model, which is a massive retail market straight away. They do have medicinal cannabis there. But my understanding is in Germany, one of the real drivers for the reform was they wanted to clamp down on the black market. The billions of dollars that cannabis was generating, funneling into criminal organisations who then went on to do horrendous things with it.
Yeah, and if you bring it into the fold, as you say, if you can keep the money into the system, whether it's the laissez-faire capitalist model of parts of America, which, you know, I don't necessarily think you want cannabis completely free market. You don't want it sold in supermarkets. There's got to be restrictions, like, as you said, with alcohol. And I think you got to start more restrictive and loosen it up slowly and build on it, because, if you start totally free and liberalised, it's hard to claw back. But I think you can sort of slowly work out the models and sort of loosen things up and get to a good balance of availability, allowing people to access it where they need it, but also, sort of reducing the chances of children being able to access, minors and that other thing. But ironically about that, some of those states in America have had reduced use for people under 18 since legalisation. So again, that's sort of that the thing. But I think there's all these.
It loses its cultural cachet. It's not rebellion. It's like it's grandpa's gummies. It's his back pain medication. It's not really like sticking it to the man. It's just it's just a little bit of weed.
Yeah, and alcohol is, there's a new generation of people who are drinking less alcohol than my generation. So bring it into the fold. You use all these models. Look at where it's working. Try. I think there's so much information. There's so many countries doing it. Canada have got they've got a sort of good balance, I think. And there's so much information in so many places out there that are regulating cannabis, that it's happening inevitably. And Australia's a great place to grow it, right? We've got potential here to have an economy where people in Australia grow for medicinal. A lot of medicinal cannabis now sold Australia legally is imported, where we should be having our own crops. We should have our own cannabis industry, jobs for Australian people, profits for Australian companies. We should have hemp, industries for clothing, and there's so much potential here to turn it into a thriving, well-regulated, positive industry.
That's a very, very good point, and the economic benefits are enormous. In the US now, cannabis is worth the legal cannabis market in the US is worth more than $40 billion per annum. It's delivering billions of dollars per annum in terms of state tax revenue into the US and into the federal economy in Canada and in Australia. a cannabis, because I think like a lot of Australian cannabis, like we're good farmers here, goes overseas because it's a premium, and a lot of the cannabis that's being consumed here, the medicinal cannabis, is actually lower quality stuff coming in from places like South Africa and Canada. It's a good point, and one I make to the government quite a bit is that if they're looking for transitions for out of some of the industries that might not have a long lifespan in front of them, say coal mining, which is probably going to wind up over the next couple of decades, or native forest logging, there's an opportunity for economic development, regional development in cannabis, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, you probably know a lot more about this than me, and I'm still learning about it, but it seems to me that it's a potential, as you say. I mean, there's industries that are changing. We've got the resources, we've got the right country, we've got this, the environment, the land, the sun. We have a lot of positives there, and if it's happening anyway, and it's a positive move, and removing that stigma is a positive justice issue, and then you've got this added bonus that you're creating an industry and you're potentially creating jobs and something for Australians. I mean, it's just a win-win, right?
It sure is. Now, speaking of winning, we hope that you're going to win the Senate spot for the Legalise Cannabis Party. We've got great candidates here in New South Wales. Yourself are leading the Senate campaign. We're about to launch a number of lower house candidates. We've got great people across the state. What's the feedback been since you've been telling family and friends that you're heading up the Legalise Cannabis Party? Are people clutching their pearls? Is your mum crying on the phone, or are people seeing it as a real opportunity for yourself, of course, but for a conversation about an important social policy area?
Well, yeah, I mean, thanks, Jed. I mean, I hope we can do well at this election. I think it's sort of now is a really important. There's a good chance for small parties like us. So we're a growing party. We've been doing really well in the state elections. We've been getting people elected in New South Wales, Western Australia, Victoria. It's incredible to see how well Legalise Cannabis is doing. We've got, like yourself, Jeremy, elected here, which is awesome, and what you've been doing in the state parliament, I think, is fantastic for the cause. But it's I feel like now's the time. The major parties are sort of suffering a bit politically. There is a chance for smaller parties to make a difference, independents, things like that. And I think a party like us, which is we're focusing on one really crucial issue. We've got a potential here to get someone elected and force change. And I think we've got some really good policy, really good ways of dealing with, some positive sort of theories about how we deal with other legislation, considering the lens of, compassion and human rights and civil liberties and privacy and all that.
A value
system,
yeah,
which is great because we can look at we're not beholden to some to a big party's policies. We can look at each policy as it comes along and consider it according to the values of our party, which I think is great. And Legalise Cannabis has got a really good policy value. So I think it's a really big opportunity for us to potentially get someone in Canberra, make it, But in terms of your question about me getting out there and telling people, of course, I mean, it's an interesting one. You're coming out and telling people about your cannabis, that you're going to be out there advocating for a legalised cannabis. Of course, there's stigma attached to that. Cannabis is still a stigmatized product. So one of my things I like to say is there's no shame in cannabis. We've got to create that pride, like the gay rights pride movement or civil, there's got to be, I'd like to see that people can feel comfortable wearing this T-shirt on the street, talking about cannabis, being proud that, pride might not be the right word, but no shame. This is a medicine that people are being used. Everyone knows someone who's got pain issues or anxiety, and cannabis is becoming more and more popular. Over 1 million people are using it, prescribed it. Everyone knows a grandma now who uses cannabis. That stigma is slowly being chipped away. but we've got to keep that fight up. And I had to face that too, coming out and, saying, look, I'm back into because I took a few years off to have some young kids, and I got back into the drug law reform movement. I spoke at Mardi Gras last year when Michael Balderstone, the head of the hemp.
That's the big annual festival, the beginning of May each year. May the 5th, isn't it? Up at Nimbin in northern New South Wales. It's been going for decades, hasn't it? It's been going since the 70s.
Yeah, if you haven't been, you got to go. It's one of the best festivals in Australia, in the world. I think it's amazing. And
I think it's one of the biggest tourist destinations in Australia, Nimbin.
Yeah.
The backpackers, they all fly into Brisbane, they all fly into Sydney, and the Spanish and, Canadian, whoever backpackers, they're all like, I'm heading up the coast, I'm heading down the coast, I'm hitting Nimbin, because it's a cultural icon.
You got to make a pilgrimage to Nimbin, right?
And the hemp embassy.
Yeah, I mean, everyone who's used cannabis, I think, has been to Nimbin. It's, as you say, the hemp embassy. It's amazing. It's in a way the centre of the cannabis movement, which is a big movement. Cannabis has been prohibited for 100 years, and people have been criminalised. Millions of people have been criminalised. People have suffered the taboo and the consequences, which is now even
incarceration. People have been, for growing weed, have spent, decades in jail.
Yeah, exactly. And people now can't drive, who use cannabis. There's been mud thrown at these users for years, and no wonder people who use cannabis don't necessarily want to admit it or talk about it. So I think that's part of the thing, is like bringing back that sort of pride, and let's get out there and celebrate cannabis as a substance. I always feel like, cannabis has sort of got this reputation as the devil's leaf, marijuana, it's evil, all this sort of those ads from the 20s and the 30s and 40s, which the reefer madness and all that. But cannabis is a gift from God. I'm not necessarily religious, but like I believe in spirituality and all that sort of thing. And to me, like, you've got this plant that has so many positive benefits to people in medicine. That you read the book at the Hemp Embassy from people who use medicinal cannabis, and there's hundreds of ailments, Crohn's disease and arthritis and chronic pain and epilepsy, and you just read these stories of this CBD oil or this THC oil has changed my life. It stopped me having this pain. It's just, you can't read that and not feel positive about this plant. And I read this book, The Emperor's New Clothes, about prohibition of cannabis through America throughout the last century, and it just goes on. It talks about all the how hemp was a big product that was going to be used for paper, and then
textiles, and then massive threat to the petrochemical, cotton,
and billionaires stopped it, right?
Yeah,
there was a Hearst, or a paper company sort of stopped it in its tracks, and you saw the influence of capital in that situation in a negative way. And they stuffed it up, and then you got this. It can create oil, as you say, potentially more sustainable biomass oils, more sustainable clothing than cotton, better paper. It uses less water and resources to grow. It's like it's the perfect plant given to us by whatever power is out there to be used in a positive way. And what do humans do? Criminalise it.
Well, I read up on the etymology of like cannabis sativa, and sativa is the Latin word for cultivated, so it's the cultivated cannabis.
Right.
And the archaeologists have found like cannabis seeds in diggings in northeast China that go back like 8,000, 9,000 years, which is pretty much when we first started agriculture and domesticating plants and animals. It's in that very first of those plants that we domesticated, and just a myriad of uses, and to criminalise it and stigmatise it just seems like madness.
Well, as you say, it's been used across the world, through the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and through history. As you say, people were cultivating this plant for so many purposes: medicinal, recreational, spiritual and ceremonial, and then for ship sales, all sorts of stuff. And then thousands of years we've been using it, and then suddenly for 100, it gets criminalised in America, and then across the world, the UN conventions, and now, ironically, America's sort of slowly winding it back, and And now maybe we can make peace with cannabis, make peace with the war on drugs in a way. You know?
Well, it's interesting you say slowly America's winding it back. Like here in Australia, I don't think we truly understand the scope of the change that's happening in the US. Like both major parties there, Republican and Democrat, took a cannabis legalisation platform to the last federal election. They're looking to deregulate some of the restrictions that limit cannabis companies' capacity to trade and access banking. And even Donald Trump was supporting the referenda in Florida on cannabis legalisation. So it's not a left-right, conservative, progressive, city-country issue. It's a human issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's one of the beautiful things about the cannabis story is that it breaches the divide. People can see the criminalisation. People can, progressive people or left-wing people can see the failure of criminalisation and how that attacks human people. But humans on a justice level, and they can really get behind that issue. And then you can have people on the right who might be more libertarian and free from government control, and can see how ridiculous it is that the government's controlling out whether or not you can use cannabis. So you're right; it can go across the divide, as you say. Farmers can get behind it as a product, and the Greens can get behind it as an issue as well. And
I think the first party to bring it, one of the first parties to bring a bill in with the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah,
David Lyon, hardly a bleeding heart lefty.
Guns and cannabis was his
guns and cannabis, but just the Doge. But what we've seen is that it spans a political and cultural spectrum, but it impacts most the working class, doesn't it? Because you come from a traditional National Party right-wing electorate, Port Macquarie, that area up there. You must be you're in the electorate. What federal electorate do you live in?
Lyne, I think.
Yeah, that's right, Lyne.
And Cowper's just north.
Yeah, Cowper's just north. So, but that's like National Party heartland.
Yeah.
That's where they formed, and yet that's where our vote is the biggest. People would think that our vote would be biggest in like inner Melbourne, inner Sydney, but our vote is huge and growing really quickly in those places like the Central Coast, Western Sydney, Western Melbourne, and those regional areas like the Hunter Valley, Latrobe Valley, North Coast of New South Wales. It's a working class issue because it's a working class drug because it's affordable. You can grow it yourself, and people, that they're not taking cocaine or meth or whatever and holding down jobs, but they can grow a bit of weed, share some weed with friends, buy some off a mate down the road, and still hold down a job and get on with their lives.
Yeah, it's interesting that the regional areas of where we're getting our most vote. And that's true. And I live in an electorate where you say it's an interesting situation. And I think I agree. There's certainly a connection to the working class, and cannabis. The prohibition and criminalisation of cannabis is something that people have had to not hide away up till now, and it's something hopefully we can change. And I think legalisation, it certainly affects minority groups as well, marginalised groups, young people,
Aboriginal Australians. They're over policing, because it's regional people that are losing their licences to RDT. It's regional people that are getting searched in the street on, suspicion of cannabis possession. It's not happening on the North Shore, is it?
No, and you can't drive. If you can't drive in the coast, there's no public transport.
That's it. You're done and dusted. You either have your medicine,
yep,
you break the law, or you don't drive.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. It just shows you that the cannabis reform is understood and sort of supported across the board, right? And there's no generic or stereotypal person of who's going to vote for you. It can all sorts of people, and that's great. It just shows that we are a party that's for everyone.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's interesting. You were talking about Lucy Haslam and Dan Haslam back in the day, though, that initial push. Well, that came out of Tamworth. And like that's Barnaby Joyce's, hometown. I mean, it's probably the most conservative part of Australia, yet that human, compelling story led to this change. And it's one that I think resonates with a lot of people, and one that you're committed to take to Canberra. So you're ready to go? Are you, if you are elected, what's going to be the first order of business in Canberra? Is it a legalisation bill?
Yeah, well, I have to probably, I mean, if we're fortunate to get it'd be great to get a senator or two across this country. And, Victoria, New South Wales, there's some great candidates, as you mentioned before. Fiona Patton in Melbourne, and there's I met some great people in who are running all across the country for Legalise Cannabis. So really good, be great if it happened. I'd love to be involved or sent to Canberra and do my best for the people who vote for us and for everyone, and try and bring some sort of be an honest, decent, compassionate, understanding politician who tries to make the right decision for people. Is not beholden to big party interest groups and lobby groups, and we're a party that is founded on small donations. Cannabis users out there will give us a bit of money here and there, $20, $50, anything. That's what funds our campaigns. It's not huge donations from corporate interests. So I feel like that's the new politics. We got to start in a way. We've got to change the system a bit. I think shake it up. Get more independence and small parties in the parliament. I think we can do more. I think we can make a better society, and consider each bill on its merits, and try and bring a new sort of way of thinking and looking at these things. So hopefully I can do that. And if I'm elected, I mean, it's going to be really intense, and there'll be so much to learn and all that sort of stuff. I think we got federally. It's a bit different to the states in terms of the general criminal codes that most people are used to are through their state parliaments, which is more your area, Jeremy. I know you're doing a lot of good stuff there around drug driving and cannabis driving, and trying to work on the pushing that agenda. But federally, I think it's the first order of business is trying to remove the cannabis from the federal criminal code, the Crimes Act of the Commonwealth, which makes it difficult for states to start decriminalising, legalising, having their own the ACT has got a situation now where they're sort of allowing people to grow their own and be able to share a small amount of cannabis up to 50 grams. That's great, and it's they're trying to do it in a way where they don't get caught up in the Commonwealth overarching act. So I think the first thing we've got to do is remove cannabis from that, allow states to be able to consider how they'll be able to regulate cannabis, because it's happening, it's going to happen, and let's federally allow that to happen. And then the federal government, I think, has got potential to set up a cannabis authority and deal with UN conventions and excises and tax and the way you regulate it.
Well, I think one of the things that the Cannabis Party is taking to the election is a call for a cannabis summit.
Yeah.
And it's overdue, isn't it? Federally, getting all the experts in the room, getting law enforcement, health professionals, the medicinal cannabis industries, experts from around the world together to really nut out the best model and a way forward to end what is, it's a problem that's it's overdue, to say the least. To be reformed. So a cannabis summit.
I mean, it sounds that's the way to do it, isn't it? Just hear from everyone, bring all this knowledge and information together to bear, use those international examples, and come up with a model or models for the best way forward to deal with this issue. And we can't put it off anymore. I mean, this year's the 100 years of Prohibition, 2025, century of failure. I like to call it. We've got to. This is the time to do it. I think now let's grab a hold of it and try and start making just and positive laws around cannabis from now.
Miles, well, that is a fantastic sentiment to end on. I couldn't put it any better. You're clearly, an intelligent, articulate, courageous, and honest guy, mate. You really are, and you've been a leader in this space for a long time. You've put your life on the line for the cause. So, everyone, if you're watching at home, check out Miles Hunt. Have a look at his opinion piece, which is really amazing, and get behind the campaign. Support the Legalise Cannabis Party. Support Miles in his bid for the Senate. Make sure you look for the leaf, because the leaf is on the ballot. It's easy enough. Look for the leaf. Vote one, the Legalise Cannabis Party. Get behind Miles. Well done, mate. Miles for the Senate. All the way, brother.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate it, mate. Great to be on Into the Weeds. Great podcast you're doing, and I really appreciate being on here and speaking to everyone. Let's do it. Legalise Cannabis 2025.
Let's do it, mate. Thanks.
Cheers, bro.